My mother refused to attend my graduation unless I stood on stage and apologized for humiliating our family a year earlier. It was something I never did. No apology means no parents there, she texted me. My father completely agreed. But they both forgot what that specific date meant and exactly why I had picked it. So instead of begging for their presence, I gave their front row seats away to the men who secretly own their entire lives. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who underestimated your worth. Growing up in the affluent suburbs of Atlanta meant everything was about keeping up appearances. To the outside world, the Sterling family was the picture of Black excellence. My father, Marcus, ran a highly successful logistics company, and my mother, Valerie, hosted charity galas in our massive estate. But behind the heavy oak doors, love was strictly transactional. I am Zaria, 32 years old, and I have always been the family disappointment. Not because I failed, but because I refused to play their games. I stood in the small dressing area behind the university auditorium, smoothing the heavy black fabric of my Master of Business Administration gown. The gold valedictorian cord swung slightly as I adjusted my cap in the mirror. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. Today was supposed to be my triumph. 5 grueling years of night classes paying my own tuition by working 80-hour weeks as a financial strategist, all while my parents funneled hundreds of thousands of dollars into my older brother DeAndre. My phone vibrated sharply against the vanity table. I already knew who it was. The screen lit up with a message from my mother. I picked it up, my eyes scanning the harsh words that I had come to expect. Unless you publicly apologize for humiliating your brother and Savannah last year, your father and I will not be attending. Apologize or look at empty seats. A bitter laugh caught in my throat. You humiliate this family. That was her favorite phrase. It had been her mantra ever since that disastrous dinner exactly 1 year ago. DeAndre, the undisputed golden child, had started another failing business venture. He and his white wife, Savannah, lived a lifestyle entirely funded by my parents. Savannah drove a luxury SUV, wore designer clothes, and threw lavish parties, all while contributing absolutely nothing. When DeAndre needed a massive loan to cover his mounting debts, my parents demanded that I use my pristine credit score to co-sign for him. They expected me to risk my own financial ruin to protect Savannah's luxury lifestyle. When I flatly refused to sign the papers, my mother accused me of tearing the family apart. You are humiliating this family, she had screamed at me. You are just jealous because Savannah knows how to keep a man happy, and you are sitting alone with your spreadsheets. The sheer audacity of her text message today was staggering. She wanted me to stand in front of my peers, my professors, and hundreds of guests and apologize for protecting my own livelihood. She wanted me to validate her golden boy on my day of victory. I stared at my reflection. The old Zaria would have cried. The old Zaria would have sent a desperate, pleading message, begging them to come, promising to make it right. But that woman was gone. I deleted her contact from my phone and typed a simple response. Do not worry. The seats will not be empty. I hit send, turned off my phone, and slipped it into my pocket. I did not shed a single tear. I picked up my red leather folder from the desk, the folder that held my actual plan for today, and walked out of the dressing room. The hallway was bustling with excited graduates finding their families, but I walked past them with absolute purpose. I headed straight for the VIP reception area near the front entrance of the auditorium. Standing near the velvet ropes were 3 older men dressed in immaculate, custom-tailored suits. They looked entirely out of place among the excited, chaotic crowd of cheering families. These were not proud grandfathers or smiling uncles. I approached the tallest of the 3, a man named Arthur Vance. Mr. Vance, I said, keeping my tone perfectly professional. Thank you all for coming today. Arthur extended a firm hand. Congratulations, Zaria. We would not miss this. You promised us quite a return on our investment of time today. I reached into my graduation gown pocket and pulled out 2 gold-foiled tickets. These are VIP front row seats, I told them, handing the tickets over. They offer a direct line of sight to the podium. You will want to hear every single word I have to say." Arthur examined the tickets and smiled. "Your father has been dodging our calls for 3 weeks. He thinks he can buy time by ignoring the problem." "He does not know I invited you," I replied smoothly. "He thinks those seats belong to him and my mother. He believes his absence today is a punishment that will break me. But he is about to find out that his daughter understands exactly how his business operates." The men taking those seats were the board of directors of Vanguard Sterling Bank. They were the primary lenders for my parents' logistics company. For years, my father had maintained the illusion of immense wealth by borrowing heavily against the family business. He leveraged company assets to buy DeAndre's mansion, to fund Savannah's extravagant trips, and to maintain my mother's country club lifestyle. And for the past 8 months, Vanguard Sterling Bank had not received a single payment. My parents were completely bankrupt, hiding behind a facade of luxury, desperately hoping a miracle would save them. I had spent the last year secretly working with Arthur Vance, mapping out the exact financial decay of my family's empire. I gave them the VIP tickets because I knew my parents would never show up. My parents thought their absence was the ultimate power play. They thought leaving me alone on my graduation day would crush my spirit and force me into submission. They truly believed I was just the selfish, ungrateful daughter who humiliated the family. They had no idea that I had just given their seats to the men who secretly owned every single thing they had ever touched. While I stood in the cool, air-conditioned auditorium surrounded by bank executives, a very different scene was unfolding 30 miles away. At DeAndre's sprawling estate in the suburbs, the music was blaring. Savannah was holding her phone high in the air, broadcasting a live stream to her thousands of followers. She twirled by the edge of the massive infinity pool, a designer cocktail dress clinging to her frame, completely oblivious to the financial quicksand beneath her bare feet. "Welcome to the best Saturday ever," Savannah cooed into the camera, tossing her blonde hair over her shoulder. "We are just having a little intimate family celebration. Good vibes only today." She panned the camera across the patio. My father Marcus was standing by the outdoor kitchen flipping steaks on a custom grill that cost more than my first car. He was laughing loudly, holding a beer, playing the role of the carefree, wealthy patriarch. My mother Valerie was lounging on a cabana bed, holding a mimosa, looking perfectly relaxed. This was their calculated retaliation. They were throwing a lavish pool party at the exact moment I was supposed to be walking across the stage. They wanted the world to see that they were entirely unbothered by my milestone. They wanted me to check social media and feel the crushing weight of their exclusion. Savannah walked over to my mother, turning the camera so they were both in the frame. "Cheers to family," Savannah said brightly. "Real family who supports each other." My mother smiled at the camera, raising her glass. "Family is everything." Savannah took a sip of her drink and looked directly into the lens, her tone shifting to something dripping with condescension. "It is just such a shame that some people are too selfish to be part of a real family. Some people only care about themselves and their little degrees. But we do not let toxic energy ruin our peace. We cut out the negativity." Her words were a direct arrow aimed at me. She felt culturally and financially superior simply because she had married my brother. She loved playing the wealthy housewife, spending my parents' money with absolute entitlement while painting me as the bitter, jealous villain who refused to support them. She truly believed her lifestyle was untouchable. She believed the mansion, the cars, and the endless stream of cash were her birthright for marrying the golden child. I did not need to watch the live stream to know exactly what they were doing. My phone had been buzzing with text messages from cousins and distant relatives who were watching Savannah's broadcast, asking me why my parents were at a pool party instead of my graduation. I ignored every single message. I stood backstage listening as the university dean approached the microphone. The auditorium fell silent. The air was thick with anticipation. "Ladies and gentlemen," the dean announced, his voice echoing through the massive hall. "It is my distinct honor to introduce this year's valedictorian, a student who exemplifies dedication, brilliance, and extraordinary financial acumen. Please welcome Zaria Sterling." The crowd erupted into applause. I walked out from behind the heavy velvet curtains and stepped into the bright stage lights. The applause washed over me, but my eyes immediately scanned the front row. There, sitting in the plush VIP chairs reserved for the parents of the valedictorian, were Arthur Vance and the board members of Vanguard Sterling Bank. They were looking up at me, waiting. I reached the wooden podium and adjusted the microphone. I did not bring index cards. I did not bring a folded speech about chasing dreams or changing the world. Instead, I placed my red leather folder directly onto the podium. I opened it, my eyes sweeping across the massive crowd. "Thank you," I began, my voice steady and clear projecting through the speakers. "Today is supposed to be a day of celebration, a day where we look out into the audience and thank the families who sacrificed everything to get us here." I paused, looking directly at the empty seats next to the bank executives. "But my parents are not here today. They refused to attend. They told me that unless I stood on this stage and publicly apologized for humiliating this family, I would look out at empty seats." A low murmur ran through the audience. People shifted uncomfortably, unsure if this was a planned part of the speech or a live breakdown. I gripped the edges of the podium. They demanded an apology because 1 year ago, I refused to drain my own savings to fund a fraudulent lifestyle. I refused to co-sign a loan for a brother who has never worked a full day in his life, and a sister-in-law who believes entitlement is a career. My mother told me I humiliate this family. But true humiliation is living a lie. True humiliation is bankrupting a 40-year-old family business to pay for luxury cars and infinity pools, while defaulting on every single corporate loan. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. Down in the front row, Arthur Vance leaned forward, his eyes locked on me. I tapped the red folder on the podium. "I learned a lot during my time in this master's program. I learned about corporate restructuring. I learned about hostile takeovers. And most importantly, I learned how to buy distressed debt. So no, Mom and Dad, I will not apologize. I will not apologize for protecting myself. Because while you are sitting by a pool that you do not actually own, celebrating a lifestyle you can no longer afford, I am standing here holding the deed to your debt." I closed the red folder with a sharp, echoing snap. "Thank you to the university for the education. I am going to use it right now." I stepped back from the podium. The auditorium was dead silent for 3 long seconds before the bank executives in the front row stood up and began clapping. Slowly, the rest of the crowd joined in the applause, swelling into a deafening roar. I walked off the stage, my heart pounding with pure adrenaline. As I reached the backstage area, my phone began to vibrate violently in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was my father calling, over and over again. Savannah's live stream must have reached him. I declined the call, blocked his number, and smiled. The graduation was over, but the real lesson was just beginning. I looked out at the sea of faces, taking a slow, measured breath. The silence in the auditorium was absolute, heavy with expectation. I did not open the red folder resting on the podium. I did not need to. I knew exactly what I was going to say. "True legacy is not inherited," I began. My voice steady, ringing clear through the massive speakers. "It is built. It is earned through late nights, through sacrifice, and through an unwavering commitment to reality." But too often we are taught that loyalty means blind obedience. We are conditioned to believe that setting ourselves on fire to keep others warm is a noble act. I let my gaze drift from the back of the hall down to the glowing red recording light of the broadcasting camera, knowing exactly who was watching on the other side of that lens. Some people believe that entitlement is a career path. They believe that a legacy is something you can drain a bottomless account used to fund a mirage of success. When you refuse to participate in that financial fiction, you are branded a traitor. I was told that I am selfish. I was told I humiliated my family by refusing to fund a delusion. A ripple of whispers swept through the student section, but I kept my eyes locked on the front row. Arthur Vance, the senior board member of Vanguard Sterling Bank, sat perfectly still. He slowly uncrossed his legs and leaned forward, resting his chin on his steepled fingers. Beside him, the bank's chief financial officer offered a single approving nod. They knew exactly what delusion I was talking about. They had seen the ledgers. They had seen the millions of dollars my father had bled from the company payroll to finance DeAndre's failing startups and Savannah's designer wardrobe. But parasitic entitlement always has an expiration date, I continued, my voice rising with absolute authority. A house built on fraudulent loans and leveraging the hard work of others will eventually collapse under its own weight. True humiliation is not walking away from a bad investment. True humiliation is waking up one day to realize that the empire you boast about is owned entirely by the people you underestimated. The executives in the VIP row exchanged knowing glances. Arthur Vance actually smiled a sharp, predatory grin. He knew my father had been dodging his phone calls for 3 weeks. He knew the logistics firm was entirely underwater. And he knew that I was the only person in the Sterling family who actually understood the math. Today I do not thank those who demanded my silence, I said, delivering the final blow directly to the camera. I thank those who underestimated me. You taught me how to read the fine print. You taught me that true power does not come from a shared last name. It comes from owning the debt. While the auditorium erupted into thunderous applause, the atmosphere 30 miles away at the suburban estate was violently shifting. Savannah had her iPad propped up on the outdoor bar, streaming the commencement ceremony live to her followers while she sipped her third martini. She rolled her eyes at the screen, scoffing loudly. "Listen to her," Savannah mocked, gesturing to the iPad with her perfectly manicured hand. "She is so dramatic. This is exactly why nobody wanted to go. She always makes everything about herself, so selfish." Marcus walked over to the bar to grab another beer, wiping barbecue sauce from his hands with a linen towel. He glanced casually at the iPad screen, expecting to see me looking miserable and alone. He expected a tearful apology, a public surrender to his authority. Instead, the camera angle switched to a wide shot of the stage and the audience. The high-definition broadcast clearly captured the VIP section directly in front of the podium. Marcus froze. The beer bottle slipped from his hand, shattering against the expensive stone patio. Foam and glass exploded across the deck, splashing onto Savannah's bare legs. "Marcus, what is wrong with you?" Valerie shrieked from her cabana bed, dropping her mimosa. "You are ruining the travertine." Marcus did not hear her. He could not hear anything over the sudden rushing sound of his own heartbeat. He pushed Savannah aside, roughly grabbing the iPad with trembling sauce-stained hands. He pulled the screen inches from his face, his eyes wide with absolute paralyzing terror. He recognized the men sitting in the seats he had abandoned. He recognized Arthur Vance. He recognized the head of commercial lending. He recognized the entire executive board of Vanguard's Sterling Bank, the men who held the life-or-death power over his heavily mortgaged business, his home, and his entire fraudulent existence. "Why are they there?" Marcus gasped, his voice barely a wheeze. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking hollow and old. "Why is the board of Vanguard sitting in my seats?" Valerie rushed over, annoyed by the sudden shift in energy. "What are you talking about? Who cares who is sitting there? They are our lenders, Valerie." Marcus roared, his panic finally breaking through his arrogant facade. "The bank that has been calling me for a month. The bank I have been avoiding because we are in default. Zaria gave them our tickets. She put them in the front row." Savannah blinked, her alcohol-buzzed brain struggling to process the information. "So what? It is just a graduation." Marcus ignored her, frantically digging into his pockets for his cell phone. His hands were shaking so violently he almost dropped it twice. He realized in one terrifying instant that his daughter had not just given away 2 folding chairs. She had orchestrated a strategic meeting with his creditors on the exact day his loans were scheduled for review. Back in the auditorium, I stepped off the stage, the heavy red leather folder firmly in my grasp. The roar of the crowd was a physical force washing over me in waves of pure triumph. I walked down the side aisle toward the exit, leaving the academic procession behind. I did not need to sit through the rest of the ceremony. My work here was done. As I pushed through the heavy double doors into the quiet, sunlit lobby, my phone began to vibrate violently in my pocket. I pulled it out. The caller ID flashed brightly. "Dad." The phone buzzed continuously, a desperate, frantic plea for attention from a man who had ignored my existence for 32 years. He was calling to demand answers. He was calling to exert control. He was calling because he finally realized that the daughter he called a disappointment was holding the keys to his kingdom. I stared at the screen for exactly 2 seconds. Then I hit the red decline button. The ringing stopped. I opened my messaging app, selected my father's contact, and typed a single final response before heading toward my car. "Enjoy the party. I'm bringing my graduation gift to you." The smooth leather steering wheel of my car felt unnaturally warm beneath my bare palms as I slowly merged onto the crowded highway, heading straight north toward the highly affluent suburbs of Buckhead. My phone buzzed persistently in the cup holder. My father was calling again. Then my mother called, leaving voicemails. The frantic digital panic of a family realizing their financial fortress was built on sand. I did not answer a single call. I simply turned the volume down and let the rhythmic vibration serve as the soundtrack to my drive. I kept my graduation gown on. The heavy black fabric pooled around my legs, and my valedictorian cord swung slightly against the dashboard. They had demanded I apologize in this exact outfit. They wanted me to bow my head and beg for their presence. Instead, I was wearing it as armor. The 30-mile drive gave me time to reflect on my family. I thought about how many times I had made this exact trip, driving up to DeAndre's sprawling estate to deliver a birthday gift, a holiday pie, or a bailout check. I had spent my entire adult life trying to be the perfect daughter, hoping that logic and hard work would eventually earn the respect that my brother received simply for existing. My mother had always excused DeAndre's massive failures while magnifying my smallest missteps. She called him a visionary when he launched a useless tech startup that hemorrhaged cash. She called me a disappointment when I bought a modest condo instead of a flashy mansion. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. The red leather folder rested on the passenger seat. Inside that folder was the culmination of a year of absolute silence and relentless financial strategy. Vanguard Sterling Bank had been more than happy to offload a toxic, non-performing asset. They just never expected the buyer to be the debtor's own daughter. I turned off the main highway and glided onto the private, tree-lined street leading to the gated community. The towering ancient oak trees cast incredibly long, shifting shadows directly across the dark hood of my car. I pulled up to the massive wrought iron gates of DeAndre and Savannah's neighborhood. The security guard recognized my car and waved me through, completely unaware that the balance of power in the Sterling family had just permanently shifted. The sprawling driveway of the estate was packed with expensive luxury vehicles. I parked my modest sedan right behind Savannah's brand new, blindingly white Range Rover, boxing it in completely. I grabbed the heavy red folder, stepped out of the car, and adjusted my graduation cap. The thumping bass of upbeat summer music echoed from the backyard. I walked down the side path, the heavy iron gate unlatched for their guests. When I rounded the corner to the massive pool deck, the sheer opulence of the party hit me. Caterers carried trays of expensive appetizers. The infinity pool sparkled under the afternoon sun. My father Marcus stood frozen by the outdoor kitchen, his phone pressed to his ear, his face the color of wet ash. My mother Valerie was sitting upright on a cabana bed, frantically typing on her phone. They were in total panic mode, desperately trying to reach me, completely oblivious to the fact that I was standing right there. Savannah was still holding her phone, posing with a group of friends near the swim-up bar. I did not sneak in. I walked straight toward the center of the patio, my black graduation gown billowing in the summer breeze, cutting through the sea of pastel resort wear. One by one, the guests noticed me. The laughter began to die down. The casual conversations faded into confused whispers. Savannah's friends lowered their drinks, staring at the woman in a graduation gown crashing a luxury pool party. Finally, Savannah turned around. The fake camera-ready smile dropped from her face. She signaled a catering staff member to cut the music. The sudden silence on the patio was deafening. My mother looked up from her phone, her eyes widening in absolute horror as she saw me standing there. My father dropped his phone onto the granite counter. He looked from me to the red folder in my hand, the reality of my commencement speech, finally making contact with his physical world. DeAndre stepped out from the house, holding a fresh cocktail freezing mid-step when he saw me disrupting his perfect afternoon. The entire party was staring at the family scapegoat who had just boldly walked into the lion's den. Savannah marched directly toward me, her heels clicking aggressively against the wet stone deck. She still clutched a martini in one hand, her face twisting with a fury born of pure, unchecked white privilege. She was furious I ruined her social media aesthetic. "You were not invited to our home," Zaria. Savannah hissed, her voice loud enough for every single guest to hear. "Leave before you humiliate us again. We are celebrating real success today." I did not flinch. I simply smiled, reaching up to perfectly adjust the tassel on my graduation cap. Savannah scoffed, looking me up and down with absolute disgust. "Are you still bitter we didn't let you design the boutique?" Savannah sneered, crossing her arms. "Is that what this is? You are mad, DeAndre, and I hired a real firm instead of letting you do it." She conveniently left out the fact that they expected me to do months of complex financial design and labor for her failed luxury boutique completely for free. When I demanded a contract, they branded me a traitor. I patiently let her finish her little performance. I let the guests hear her toxic entitlement. Then I unclasped the heavy red folder and slowly pulled out a thick watermarked document. "I am not here today to be your guest, Savannah," I told her, my voice carrying perfectly across the completely silent patio. "I am the sole landlord here." Savannah's face contorted into a mask of pure confusion. She blinked rapidly, her eyes darting from my calm face to the heavy red folder in my hands, trying to process a reality that completely shattered her perfect suburban illusion. "A landlord," she echoed the word stumbling out of her mouth, like it tasted like ash. "What are you even talking about? You are completely out of your mind." DeAndre stepped out from the crowd of stunned guests, a nervous, forced laugh erupting from his chest. He was wearing designer linen pants and a silk shirt, looking every bit the wealthy heir he pretended to be, but the sweat gathering on his forehead betrayed his rising panic. He forced another laugh, loud and hollow, meant to reassure his wealthy friends who were watching us with undivided attention. "Okay, Zaria, joke is over," DeAndre said, his voice carrying a desperate edge disguised as brotherly annoyance. "You made your dramatic entrance. Now put the fake papers away before you ruin the party." He reached out quickly, his hand darting forward to snatch the watermarked document right out of my grasp. I stepped back instantly, letting his hand grasp nothing but empty air. I held the document firmly, keeping it safely out of his reach. "This is not a prop for your little pool party, DeAndre," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the silent patio. "And this is certainly no joke. This is the financial reality you have been hiding from everyone standing here today." DeAndre lunged forward again, the veins in his neck bulging as his perfectly cultivated composure completely disintegrated. "Give me that paper right now," he demanded, his voice dropping into a vicious sneer. "You have no right to come onto my property and wave trash around." Before DeAndre could make another move, my mother pushed her way through the frozen crowd. Valerie inserted herself directly between us, her face flushed with absolute outrage. She threw her hands up, physically shielding her precious golden child from the daughter she despised. "What is wrong with you?" Valerie shrieked, entirely abandoning her refined country club persona. "How dare you show up here in that ridiculous outfit and make a scene in front of our guests? You are humiliating this family again." I looked at my mother, marveling at her unwavering instinct to protect a lie. "I am not making a scene, Mom. I am delivering a legal notice." Valerie scoffed loudly, pointing an accusing finger directly at my face. "You are just jealous. You have always been jealous of DeAndre. He bought this house with his own hard-earned money. He built a successful life while you were buried in your boring textbooks. Stop your jealous lies and leave his property immediately." My father Marcus finally marched over, trying to salvage the rapidly deteriorating situation. He puffed out his chest, attempting to command the space with his usual patriarchal authority. "Zaria, enough," Marcus barked, holding out his hand expectantly. "Give me whatever nonsense you printed out and get off this patio. We are not playing your bitter games today." I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I simply smiled and handed the watermarked document directly to my father. "Read it out loud, Dad," I challenged him smoothly. "Read the jealous lies to your friends." Marcus snatched the paper from my hand, his eyes scanning the bold black text at the top of the page. The deep tan of his face instantly drained, leaving him looking sickly and gray. His mouth opened, but no words came out. His hands began to tremble so violently that the heavy paper shook. "What does it say?" Valerie demanded, her voice shrill with impatience. "Tell her to leave." Marcus could not speak. He was completely paralyzed by the words printed on the page. The document was not a fake eviction notice. It was an official, legally binding notice of foreclosure. The sprawling estate with the infinity pool, the custom outdoor kitchen, and the manicured lawns was never purchased outright. It was leveraged to the absolute limit with a massive high-interest mortgage. A mortgage that had been in total default for 8 consecutive months. Every single payment had been missed. The bank had initiated foreclosure proceedings weeks ago, and DeAndre had hidden all the notices, hoping a magical bailout would save his luxurious facade. Marcus slowly lowered the paper, his eyes wide with a horrific realization. He turned to his golden child, the son who could do no wrong. DeAndre, Marcus whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of absolute betrayal. "What is this? The bank says you have not made a mortgage payment since October. You told me the logistics company profits covered the house in full." Valerie gasped, snatching the paper from my father's trembling hands. Her eyes darted frantically across the text, searching for a mistake, searching for any possible way to blame me. But the numbers were undeniable. The massive debt was spelled out in cold, hard print. DeAndre backed away from our parents, bumping into a stone planter. His face was slick with sweat. "I can explain, Dad," DeAndre stammered, looking around wildly at the guests who were hanging on his every word. "It is just a temporary cash flow issue. The bank made a mistake. I was going to wire the funds on Monday." Marcus stepped towards him, his fists clenched tight at his sides. The illusion of his wealthy empire was shattering right before his eyes. "Temporary cash flow issue." Marcus roared, his voice echoing off the expensive travertine tiles. "You are 8 months behind. Vanguard Sterling Bank is foreclosing on your home." "Why didn't you tell me Vanguard was foreclosing? We could have moved company assets. We could have restructured." I stepped forward, my black graduation gown swishing softly against the stone deck. The afternoon sun beat down on the patio, but the air between us was ice cold. "Vanguard didn't foreclose." I interrupted, my voice slicing through my father's desperate rant. Marcus snapped his head toward me, his eyes burning with confusion and panic. "What are you talking about? The notice says Vanguard." I looked directly into my father's terrified eyes, delivering the exact reality he had tried so hard to ignore. "I bought the debt from them this morning. The executives at my graduation were there to hand me the deed. I own this estate now." Savannah stared at me, her perfectly contoured face rapidly losing its color until it matched the white marble of the pool deck. The crystal martini glass slipped from her fingers, shattering violently against the ground and splashing expensive vodka across her designer pedicure. She did not even flinch at the broken glass. She whipped her head toward DeAndre, her eyes wide with a manic, terrified energy. "Tell me she is lying," DeAndre, Savannah demanded, her voice shrill, completely abandoning the faux zen persona she had broadcasted to her followers just minutes earlier. "Tell me this bitter little girl is just making things up to ruin my party." DeAndre shrank back against the outdoor kitchen counter, unable to meet his wife's furious gaze. He stared at the pool water, his silence a deafening confession. Savannah marched up to him, shoving her hands hard against his chest. I said, "Tell me she is lying. You told me you bought this house in cash. You told me your trust fund covered the boutique. You promised me a lifestyle, DeAndre." Her Southern Belle facade dissolved instantly, exposing the raw, ugly entitlement beneath. She turned her vitriol toward my parents, her voice echoing over the silent, staring crowd of caterers and wealthy friends. "This is your fault. You promised me he was set for life. I married into this family because you guaranteed financial security. I did not sign up to be humiliated by some jealous sister-in-law holding a foreclosure notice. She was practically vibrating with rage, her white privilege flaring up as she realized the wealth she had married into the wealth she used to look down on everyone else was a complete mirage. She pointed a trembling finger at me but yelled at DeAndre. She says she owns my house. Do you understand what this means? My followers think I own this. My friends think I own this. Get rid of her right now, or I am packing my bags and leaving you with this pathetic, bankrupt mess. Savannah's tantrum was a spectacle of pure greed. She did not care about DeAndre's stress. She did not care about the collapsing family business. She only cared that her aesthetic was ruined and her credit cards were about to bounce. She stomped over to a lounge chair, grabbed her expensive handbag, and glared at the caterers to stop staring. DeAndre, visibly crumbling under his wife's threat, turned his desperate, pleading eyes to the one man who had never held him accountable for a single mistake in his 34 years of life. He lunged toward our father, grabbing Marcus by the arm with sweaty, shaking hands. "Dad, you have to fix this!" DeAndre begged, his voice cracking like a terrified child. "You cannot let her do this to me. Savannah is going to leave me. You promised Vanguard would extend the grace period. You promised me you had the capital to cover the arrears." He clung to Marcus's linen shirt, entirely pathetic, completely devoid of the swagger he carried just 5 minutes ago. "Just write her a check, Dad. Pay her off. Give Zaria whatever she wants for the deed. She just wants a payout. She just wants to extort us because she is mad about the boutique. Please, Dad, just write the check so she leaves." Valerie rushed to her son's side, wrapping her arms around him and stroking his back as if he were the victim of a brutal crime. "It is going to be fine, baby," she cooed, casting a venomous glare in my direction. "Your father will take care of it. He always takes care of it. We will not let this spiteful girl steal your home. She is just trying to cause drama because she is bitter." Marcus straightened his posture physically, shaking off the initial shock of the foreclosure notice. He adjusted his collar, slipping right back into the familiar, arrogant role of the wealthy CEO who could simply purchase his way out of any inconvenience. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored jacket and pulled out a heavy, leather-bound checkbook. He clicked a gold pen with a sharp, authoritative snap. He marched up to me, standing so close I could smell the stale beer and expensive cologne radiating off his skin. He looked down his nose at me, his eyes filled with absolute disdain. "I always have to clean up your messes," Zaria Marcus growled, projecting a lifetime of DeAndre's financial disasters squarely onto my shoulders. "You throw a tantrum because you feel left out, and you drag the family name through the mud just to get my attention. It is pathetic." He aggressively flipped open the checkbook, poising the gold pen over the crisp paper. "You want to play the ruthless businesswoman? Fine. Let us play. Name your price and get out of my sight. How much to transfer the deed back to Vanguard or directly to your brother? Tell me the number, Zaria, and then you are going to leave this property and never contact us again." I looked at the checkbook. I looked at the gold pen. I looked at the man who had mortgaged my childhood to fund my brother's delusions. I did not blink. "Put the pen away, Dad," I said, my voice completely calm, devoid of any anger or sorrow. "Name your price." Marcus repeated, his voice booming over the quiet patio. "Do not push me, Zaria." I smiled, a slow, genuine smile that made the color drain from his face all over again. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only he and DeAndre could hear the final nail being driven into their coffin. "You cannot cover this, Dad," I said softly, "because the account you are trying to write that check from has been frozen since 2 o'clock this afternoon." The gold pen slipped from my father's fingers, clattering loudly against the stone deck. Marcus stared at his hands as if they had betrayed him, the heavy leather checkbook suddenly looking like a worthless prop. Frozen, he repeated the word, sounding completely foreign on his tongue. "What do you mean, frozen? I am the chief executive officer of Sterling Logistics, and I demand answers. No one freezes my accounts." Valerie pushed past DeAndre, her face twisting into pure indignation. "What kind of illegal hack did you pull on us, Zaria?" she demanded, her voice echoing sharply across the entire patio. "You think you can just march in here, spout some technical jargon, and steal your father's hard-earned money? I am calling the police right now. You are going to jail for corporate espionage." I watched my mother fumble with her clutch, her fingers shaking as she searched for her phone. "I did not hack anything, Mom," I said smoothly. "I simply notified the board of directors that corporate funds were being illicitly siphoned into a personal shell company. Specifically, a shell company registered to DeAndre, meant to artificially inflate his lifestyle while the logistics firm hemorrhaged capital." The board immediately froze all executive accounts pending a full forensic audit. Marcus stumbled backward, his knees hitting the edge of a luxury cabana bed. He sank onto the cushions, the arrogant energy draining out of his body. He knew almost exactly what I was talking about. He had been quietly bleeding his own company dry for years to cover DeAndre's massive failures. Savannah let out a sharp, hysterical gasp. "Corporate fraud!" she shrieked. "You committed corporate fraud to buy my car. You told me that was a legitimate bonus." DeAndre tried to reach for her, but she slapped his hands away, looking at him as if he were covered in toxic waste. The guests whispered furiously, pulling out phones to text their social circles. The Sterling family empire was collapsing in real time right next to the infinity pool. Valerie finally found her phone, but stopped, realizing that calling the police would only expedite my father's arrest. She glared at me with absolute venom. "You ungrateful traitor," Valerie spat, her voice trembling with rage. "You planned this. You deliberately waited until today to humiliate us. You have always wanted to destroy this family." "I did not destroy this family," I replied, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. "I am saving what is left of it." I reached up and unzipped the heavy black graduation gown. I let the cheap fabric slide off my shoulders, pooling onto the wet stone deck at my feet. Underneath, I was not wearing a casual party dress. I was wearing a sharp, custom-tailored charcoal suit, the exact kind of executive armor my father demanded his board members wear. Marcus looked at the suit, a new wave of realization washing over his face. "You look just like her," he whispered, the hostility in his voice momentarily replaced by genuine fear. I adjusted my cuffs, staring directly into his terrified eyes. "Today is May 15th, I announced, letting the date hang heavily in the humid summer air. Valerie flinched as if I had physically struck her. DeAndre looked entirely confused, too self-absorbed to understand the significance of the calendar. "May 15th, I repeated, ensuring every single guest heard the words clearly. Exactly 5 years ago today, Grandmother Odessa passed away. The matriarch who built Sterling Logistics from a single delivery truck into a statewide empire. The woman who warned you both that blindly handing the reins to an incompetent heir would destroy her legacy. Grandma knew you were spoiling DeAndre," I continued, my voice cutting through the stifling tension on the patio. "She knew you would bankrupt the logistics firm to fund his ridiculous lifestyle. She saw you excusing his laziness while demanding absolute perfection from me." My mother crossed her arms, her face flushing a deep, angry red. "Odessa was a bitter old woman who never understood modern business," Valerie hissed, trying to regain control of the narrative. "She favored you because you were just as cold and calculating as she was. She is gone, Zaria. Her opinions do not matter anymore. We own the company now." I shook my head slowly, pitying her absolute delusion. "You never owned the company, Mom. You just managed it. Grandma Odessa never trusted you or Dad to preserve the equity. She knew DeAndre would bleed the accounts dry the second she was in the ground. She knew you would let him do it, because you cared more about superficial country club appearances than actual fiscal responsibility. That is why she put the controlling shares into a blind trust." DeAndre scoffed, finally finding his voice again. "A trust that Dad controls." DeAndre sneered, trying to inject some of his old arrogance back into the conversation. "We read the will, Zaria. Dad is the executor. You get nothing but a minor payout. You are wasting your time trying to channel a dead woman." I reached into the inner breast pocket of my tailored charcoal blazer and slowly pulled out a sealed yellowed envelope. The heavy wax seal on the back bore the distinct imprint of Grandmother Odessa's personal signet ring, completely unbroken. Marcus stared at the envelope, all the remaining color vanishing from his face. He recognized the seal immediately. You read the preliminary will? I corrected DeAndre, holding the aged envelope up into the bright afternoon sunlight. The preliminary will was a decoy designed to give you enough rope to hang yourselves. Valerie stepped forward, her eyes locked onto the paper, her breath catching in her throat. What does that mean? Valerie demanded, her voice cracking with mounting panic. What is in that envelope? It means the game is officially over, I said. Grandma's real trust didn't activate until today, and there was a very specific condition to claim the controlling 51% shares of the family firm. I finally broke the heavy wax seal of Grandmother Odessa's true will. The crisp sound of tearing paper echoed across the painfully quiet patio. Marcus stared at my hands, his jaw completely slack. Valerie stopped breathing. I slid the thick parchment from the envelope and unfolded it with deliberate care. The legal jargon was precise, drafted by the finest estate attorneys in the city, but the central clause was entirely Odessa. She never believed in unearned privilege. She believed in proving your worth through struggle. I cleared my throat, ensuring my voice carried to the furthest edge of the pool deck where the caterers stood frozen. Section 4, Paragraph 2. I read aloud, my tone clear and unwavering. The controlling interest of Sterling Logistics shall not pass to my son Marcus, nor shall it be divided equally among his heirs. Instead, the controlling shares shall pass in their entirety to the first grandchild who obtains a master's degree, entirely self-funded before their 35th birthday. I lowered the parchment and looked at the crowd. The silence was absolute. Nobody moved an inch. Even the ice clinking in a discarded cocktail glass sounded like a gunshot. My grandmother had engineered a test. She knew DeAndre was handed everything on a silver platter, so she created a benchmark he could never reach without actual effort. She also knew my parents would cut me off the second I refused to obey their commands, forcing me to fund my own education. Odessa had bet her entire empire on my resilience. She bet everything that I would survive the brutal financial exile my parents constantly subjected me to. The trust remained dormant for exactly 5 years, gathering interest, waiting for one of us to cross the finish line. I crossed it completely alone today. That is a lie! Valerie shrieked, her voice shattering the quiet. Her face turned a blotchy, uneven purple as she marched forward, her manicured fingers curling into claws. You forged that document. Odessa would never cut Marcus out of the company. She would never hand the family business over to a disrespectful, ungrateful brat who abandoned her own flesh and blood. You owe us an apology for this stunt. You owe us an apology for ruining this party. You are a monster for doing this to your family. You planned this vicious attack to completely embarrass us. Marcus grabbed Valerie by the shoulder, pulling her back. He was not looking at me with anger anymore. He was looking at me with pure, unadulterated terror. He knew the signature on that wax seal was authentic. He knew the terms matched his mother's ruthless business philosophy perfectly. The reality of his monumental mistake crashed down upon him, physically buckling his knees. He had spent the last 5 years acting as the supreme ruler of Sterling Logistics, siphoning funds into DeAndre's fake ventures, assuming the company was entirely his to drain. He had treated the corporate accounts like a personal piggy bank, believing there would never be an audit. He had built his house of cards on the blind assumption that Odessa's true intentions were buried forever in a vault. He was horribly wrong. But you told us the preliminary will was final. Marcus choked out, his voice trembling so badly he sounded like a frightened child. You said there were no other stipulations. I said no such thing, Dad, I replied coldly, smoothing the parchment. The estate lawyers told you what they were legally obligated to tell you. They released the operational funds to keep the trucks running, but the controlling shares were held in escrow waiting for the conditions to be met. You were just a placeholder. You were an interim manager and you failed spectacularly. You drove Grandma's company to the brink of bankruptcy just to buy Savannah a luxury SUV and fund DeAndre's pathetic warehouse projects. Valerie frantically shook her head, tears of pure panic welling in her eyes. No, this cannot happen. We are your parents, Zaria. We raised you. We provided for you. You cannot just swoop in and take everything away from us. We will sue you. We will drag you through the courts for decades. You cannot afford to sue me, Mom, I reminded her, watching her entire world collapse. I own the company now, which means I control the payroll, the corporate assets, and the executive accounts you have been abusing. I ordered a full freeze at 2 o'clock. You do not have the capital to retain a lawyer. You do not have the capital to pay the mortgage on this ridiculous estate. You owe us an apology, Mom. You owe me an apology for every time you called me a failure while secretly bankrupting the legacy Grandma built. Your reign ends right now. DeAndre suddenly pushed past our parents, his eyes wide with a manic, desperate gleam. He pointed a shaking finger at the parchment in my hand. Wait, he yelled, his voice cracking loudly. I have a master's degree. I went to business school. I fulfill the condition. The company belongs to me. You cannot steal my shares, Zaria. Give me that deed. I am the rightful heir. He was hyperventilating, desperately clinging to the last shred of his fabricated success. He truly believed he could talk his way out of this, just like he had talked his way out of every other failure in his life. Savannah watched him with narrowed, suspicious eyes, waiting to see if her husband actually had a lifeline. I slowly folded the heavy parchment, slipping it securely back inside my tailored jacket. I looked at DeAndre with overwhelming, profound pity. He had spent his entire existence living a lie, and right now, he was drowning in it. You did not self-fund yours. DeAndre, I stated the brutal truth, hanging heavy in the air. Mom and Dad had secretly paid for every single credit hour of it. And far worse, you never actually graduated, did you? DeAndre staggered back as if I had shot him. The color drained completely from his face, leaving his heavily manicured beard looking stark against his pale skin. He looked wildly around the patio, his eyes darting from the caterers who had stopped serving to the wealthy neighbors who were absolutely glued to the unfolding drama. He swallowed hard, his throat bobbing, and forced out a laugh that sounded like a strangled cough. You are crazy, DeAndre stammered, pointing a trembling finger at me. I have my MBA from Emerson. I walked across the stage. Mom and Dad were there. I have the diploma hanging in my home office right now. You are just making up garbage because you know I am the rightful heir. I reached into my bag and withdrew a crisp blue folder. I did not need to raise my voice. The silence on the deck was so profound that the rustle of the paper sounded like a whip cracking. You have a piece of paper you bought from a print shop on the internet, I corrected him smoothly. I hired a private investigator to conduct a thorough background check on the incoming executives of my newly acquired company. I opened the folder and held up the certified university transcripts, heavily stamped with the registrar's official seal. You enrolled at Emerson, yes. But you dropped out 3 weeks into the second semester of your first year. You failed accounting, you withdrew from corporate strategy, and you were placed on academic probation before you finally abandoned the program completely 3 years ago. The murmurs erupted across the patio. DeAndre lunged forward trying to grab the folder, but I stepped smoothly out of his reach. Mom and Dad gave you $80,000 to cover the tuition fees and living expenses for that prestigious program. I continued, my voice projecting clearly over his frantic protests. You pocketed every single cent of that money. You spent it on a leased sports car, expensive watches, and weekend trips to Miami to impress your friends while pretending you were studying late at the library. You never earned a master's degree, DeAndre. You just bought a very expensive illusion. Savannah stood frozen by the lounge chairs, the broken glass of her martini still glistening around her expensive sandals. Her mouth hung open as her brain desperately tried to process the magnitude of the lie she had tethered her life to. She had married DeAndre for the prestige, the guaranteed wealth, the polished resume of a rising corporate titan. Now she was staring at a college dropout who was deeply in debt and facing imminent foreclosure. You lied to me, Savannah whispered, her voice trembling before rapidly escalating into a shrill, piercing scream. You lied to me about everything. DeAndre turned to her, his hands raised in a pathetic gesture of surrender. Savannah, baby, please listen to me, he begged, stepping toward her. I was going to go back and finish it. I just needed to get my logistics startup off the ground first. I did it for us. I did it to build our brand. Do not touch me, Savannah shrieked, slapping his hands away with enough force to echo across the water. You do not have a brand. You do not have a trust fund. You do not even have a degree. You are a complete fraud. She grabbed her designer sunglasses and hurled them directly at his chest. They bounced off his silk shirt and clattered onto the stone deck. I married a loser. I gave up my prime years to play the supportive wife to a future CEO, and you are nothing but a broke, lying scam artist. She spun around to face the remaining guests, her face flushed with extreme humiliation. Her wealthy friends, the women she had constantly bragged to about her luxurious lifestyle and brilliant husband, were staring at her with unabashed pity and shock. The perfect country club facade was entirely obliterated. There was no coming back from this social execution. Savannah grabbed her oversized sun hat and her heavy designer tote bag. She marched right past DeAndre, deliberately stepping on his expensive sunglasses and crushing them under her heel. "I am calling my lawyer," Savannah declared, her voice dripping with absolute disgust. "I am filing for divorce the second I leave this pathetic, bankrupt neighborhood. Do not expect me to be here when you get kicked out on the street." She shoved past him and stormed up the paved pathway, leaving him crying in the center of the patio he no longer owned. Valerie watched her daughter-in-law storm away, but her gaze slowly dragged back to DeAndre. The fierce maternal protection that had blinded her for decades finally shattered. The golden boy myth evaporated, leaving behind the ugly, undeniable truth. DeAndre was not a victim of my jealousy. He was the architect of his own destruction. $80,000, Valerie whispered, her voice vibrating with a terrifying rage. "You took $80,000 from us and spent it on vacations." DeAndre wiped his nose, looking desperately at his mother. "Mom, I am sorry, I can fix it. I just need a little more time." Valerie lunged forward. Her hand swung through the air and struck DeAndre across the face with a resounding, vicious slap. His head snapped to the side, a bright red mark blooming instantly across his cheek. "We took money from the company payroll to pay for that," Valerie screamed, her refined voice tearing into a raw, guttural shriek. "We delayed employee bonuses. We stalled vendor payments. We committed financial crimes to secure that cash so you could get your degree, and you bought a sports car. You owe us an apology for destroying this family." Marcus grabbed her arm, looking extremely frantic. "Keep your voice down," he hissed. I stepped closer, my voice slicing through their argument. "That is not the only thing you took from the payroll, is it, DeAndre?" I stepped toward the patio table where a silver tray of champagne flutes sat sweating. Beside it, I dropped a thick stack of envelopes. I handed the first two directly to my father and mother. Marcus took the envelope with shaking hands, his eyes darting frantically between me and DeAndre. Valerie stared at the paper as if it were a live grenade. "Open them," I commanded, my voice echoing across the silent pool deck. The remaining guests craned their necks, captivated by the total destruction of the Sterling family facade. Marcus ripped the flap open and pulled out a stack of printed bank statements, wire transfer logs, and cleared checks. The Sterling Logistics logo was printed on every single page. "These are the corporate operating accounts," Marcus whispered, his face turning an alarming shade of gray. "Why do you have these?" "Because I am conducting a forensic audit of my company," I replied smoothly. "Look at the signature lines on the outgoing transfers from the last 36 months. DeAndre stood paralyzed, his chest heaving as he watched his father flip through the pages. Marcus traced his finger along the bottom of a check, his breath hitching audibly. "This is my signature," he muttered, "but I never authorized a transfer for $40,000 to a holding firm. I did not sign this." I flipped the next page for him. "You did not sign any of them, Dad. DeAndre forged your signature on every single one of those transfers. He bypassed the dual authentication protocols you negligently left open on your office computer. Over the past 3 years, my darling brother systematically embezzled just over $600,000 from the family business." Valerie gasped, dropping her envelope onto the wet stone. $600,000. She repeated the number, suffocating her. "Where did it go?" I turned my gaze back to DeAndre, who was sweating profusely, looking completely destroyed. "It funded Savannah's luxury boutique downtown. I explained, watching Valerie's face contort with fresh, agonizing realization. The boutique that miraculously opened with cash, the one Savannah constantly bragged about at your charity luncheons. It failed 6 months ago because she spent the operating budget on designer handbags and first-class flights to Milan. DeAndre bled the logistics firm dry to pay off her commercial lease and keep the doors open just to maintain their fake socialite lifestyle. The guests murmured in shock, several of Valerie's closest friends physically stepping back from the patio in disgust. DeAndre fell to his knees, burying his face in his hands. "I had to," he sobbed, his voice muffled by his trembling fingers. "Savannah was going to leave me if the store went under. She needed the money to look successful. I was going to pay it back. I just needed one big contract to clear the books." "You never had a single contract, DeAndre," I stated, my tone devoid of any sympathy. "You just had an endless supply of stolen corporate funds. And when that supply finally started to dry up, when the accountants began asking questions about the missing capital, you panicked." That brings us to last year. My parents flinched simultaneously. The memory of last summer's family dinner was permanently burned into all of our minds. That was the night my family officially exiled me. DeAndre came to my apartment begging me to co-sign a massive commercial loan. I continued addressing my parents directly. "He told you he was expanding his fictional warehouse operations. He told you he needed my signature because his credit was tied up in corporate assets. But that was just another massive, pathetic lie. He needed that loan to quietly replace the $600,000 he stole before the end of the fiscal year audit." Valerie stared at me, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. When I refused to sign my name to a fraudulent loan, I reminded them, my voice growing colder with every syllable. "You both cornered me in the dining room. You screamed at me for 2 hours. You called me a selfish, bitter disappointment. You told me I was jealous of my brother's brilliant success. You said I was deliberately trying to sabotage the golden child because I could not secure my own promotion. You branded me a traitor to the sterling name and kicked me out of the house." Marcus looked down at the forged checks in his hand, a tear spilling over his eyelashes and tracking down his pale cheek. "We did not know," he croaked, his voice entirely broken. "We thought he was building an empire. We thought you were just being difficult." "You chose to be blind," I snapped, stepping closer to my father. "You ignored every red flag because holding DeAndre accountable would mean admitting you failed as a mentor. You wanted the illusion of a perfect son so badly that you let him destroy Grandma Odessa's legacy right under your nose." I looked down at DeAndre, still weeping on the wet stones. "You spent your life believing you were untouchable," I said. "You let them banish me to protect your lies. You stole, forged, and paraded around, acting like a king on the crumbling foundation of my grandmother's hard work. You humiliated this family." I repeated the exact phrase they had used against me for years, tossing it back with absolute finality. "You humiliated this family, DeAndre, but your reign is officially over." Marcus suddenly swayed, clutching his chest. The papers slipped from his grasp, scattering across the deck. A horrifying realization had just struck him. As the fiduciary executor, the missing $600,000 fell directly onto his shoulders because he failed to secure the accounts. He was legally responsible for his son's embezzlement. Marcus gasped for air, his face turning white as he gripped the table to keep from collapsing. I pulled out my phone and pressed a single button. I held it up, placing the call on speakerphone for everyone to hear. The line rang exactly twice before a crisp, professional voice echoed from the small speaker. "Zaria, this is Vance. I assume you are calling to confirm the execution of the Odessa Sterling Trust." "Yes, Mr. Vance," I replied, my eyes locked on my father's trembling frame. "Please inform the interim executive of his current standing." A heavy sigh transmitted over the line. "Marcus, if you are listening, I am officially serving you notice on behalf of the board of directors. As of 2 o'clock this afternoon, the exact moment Zaria's master's degree was officially conferred and verified by the university registrar, she assumed direct control of 51% of Sterling Logistics. The shares have been legally transferred from the escrow account into her name." Marcus tried to speak, but his voice was a dry, raspy wheeze. "Vance, you cannot do this. I am the CEO. I built the regional routes." "You were the interim CEO, Marcus." Vance corrected, his tone devoid of any warmth. Your mother's stipulations were incredibly specific. Upon Zaria fulfilling the educational and financial requirements, your temporary tenure automatically dissolved. The board convened an emergency session at 2:15, given the preliminary evidence of gross financial mismanagement and the $600,000 discrepancy Zaria's forensic accountants flagged this morning. The board voted unanimously. Vance paused, letting the silence amplify the impending devastation. You are hereby stripped of your title, your executive privileges, and your access to all corporate buildings. Security has already changed the locks on your office suite and revoked your keycards. You are barred from company property pending a full federal investigation into the missing capital. Your severance is withheld and your pension is frozen. The call disconnected with a sharp click. Marcus stared at the phone in my hand, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. He looked around the patio, his gaze sweeping over the luxury cabanas and the catered champagne towers. Every single item in his vision was paid for by a company he no longer controlled. He had just been fired from his own life. Zaria, you cannot do this, Marcus pleaded, his arrogance entirely extinguished. He took a stumbling step forward, his hands raised in a pathetic gesture of surrender. I am your father. I gave you your start. You need me to run the logistics network. You do not know the freight routes. You do not know the vendors. The union bosses will eat you alive without my relationships. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us until I was looking directly into his terrified eyes. I know the freight routes perfectly, Dad. I mapped out the entire eastern seaboard expansion while you were busy taking long lunches at the country club. I negotiated the new vendor contracts last year while you were busy covering up DeAndre's mistakes. The union bosses already sent me congratulatory flowers this morning because they despised your condescending management style. Marcus physically recoiled, the last remnants of his authority crumbling into dust. He looked at DeAndre, who was still cowering on the wet stone deck, and then looked back at me. The money. Marcus choked out, a fresh wave of panic seizing his chest. Zaria, the missing 600,000. The federal investigation. If they audit my personal accounts, they will see I signed the preliminary authorizations. They will think I am the one who orchestrated the embezzlement to hide DeAndre's fraud. I will go to federal prison. Then you should have hired better auditors, I stated flatly, showing absolutely no mercy. You spent 5 years treating Sterling Logistics like a personal slush fund to prop up your favorite child. You authorized those early transfers without checking the destination accounts because you blindly trusted a son who never passed a basic accounting class. You built a kingdom on a foundation of lies, and now the federal government is coming to collect the tax. He grabbed the edge of the patio table, his knuckles turning white as he desperately tried to keep himself upright. The realization that he possessed absolutely zero leverage finally broke him. He could not fire me. He could not intimidate me. He could not cut me off financially, because he was now entirely dependent on the grace of the daughter he had ruthlessly discarded. He was nothing more than a disgraced former employee facing imminent criminal charges. His elite friends were watching him beg. The wealthy neighbors he spent decades trying to impress were currently texting their social circles about his magnificent downfall. His precious country club membership would be revoked by tomorrow morning when his corporate card bounced. His entire identity was erased forever. Valerie could no longer handle the destruction of her perfect world. She let out a piercing theatrical sob and rushed toward me, her arms outstretched, tears ruining her expensive makeup. She tried to throw her arms around my neck, instantly shifting from a vicious tyrant to a victimized, loving mother. We are family, Zaria, Valerie cried, her voice dripping with artificial warmth and desperate affection. We can fix this together. We can pay the money back. You do not need to involve the authorities. You are my daughter. I carried you. I love you. I took a swift, deliberate step backward, completely avoiding her touch. Her hands grasped at empty air, leaving her stumbling awkwardly forward. I looked at her with absolute disgust. I wasn't your daughter when I was working 3 jobs just to pay my rent, I said, my voice cutting through her fake tears like a scalpel. I wasn't your daughter when I was eating instant noodles while you threw catered parties for DeAndre. I was just the disappointment. Savannah watched the exchange with calculating eyes. Seeing her wealthy relatives completely broke and realizing her fraudulent husband was facing imminent jail time, she made her final calculation. Without a word, she adjusted her designer tote bag, spun on her heel, and walked out the gates, leaving her ruined marriage behind forever. Savannah did not make it past the metal security gates. She stopped abruptly, her spine stiffening as she turned back to face the patio. The polite voice she used to charm the country club board members was completely gone. In its place was a venomous sneer that twisted her perfectly contoured face into something entirely ugly. She marched back toward the edge of the infinity pool, plunging her hand into her designer bag to toss her cell phone onto a dry lounger. Then, she violently twisted the massive diamond ring off her left hand. "You think I want any part of this bankrupt circus?" Savannah screamed, her voice echoing off the neighboring mansions. She hurled the diamond ring directly into the deep end of the pool. It hit the water with a sharp splash, sinking instantly to the bottom. "I tolerated your suffocating family for one reason, DeAndre. The sterling bank accounts. That was the only redeeming quality you had." Valerie gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "Savannah, how dare you speak to your husband that way?" Savannah whipped her head back toward my mother, her eyes blazing with undisguised bigotry. "Oh, shut up, Valerie. You have spent your entire pathetic life trying to buy your way into elite society, and you actually thought these people respected you. You threw lavish parties desperate to fit in with my friends. Do you want to know the truth? We laughed at you. Every single time you left the room, we always laughed. You thought designer clothes could erase who you really are, but you are nothing but ghetto disguised in Gucci." The sheer toxicity of her racist insults sucked the remaining air out of the patio. Marcus stiffened his face, flushing a deep red, but he was too paralyzed by his own legal doom to speak. Savannah was unhinged, letting every vile, prejudiced thought she had suppressed for a trust fund spill out into the open. "I only married him because I was promised the lifestyle of a corporate wife," she spat, gesturing wildly at DeAndre. "I put up with your loud, incredibly tacky family dinners. I smiled through the absolute torture of pretending I actually belonged in this family. But there is no money left here. There is no empire for him to inherit. He is just a pathetic, broke, lying criminal, and I am officially done playing charity case." DeAndre let out a guttural, pathetic wail. He scrambled across the wet stone deck, literally crawling on his hands and knees toward the woman who had just degraded his entire existence. The golden child, the brilliant heir to the sterling empire, was reduced to a sniveling, desperate mess in front of every neighbor who had stayed to watch the spectacle. "Savannah, please." DeAndre sobbed, his tears mixing with the spilled champagne on the patio floor. He lunged forward and wrapped his arms around her ankles, burying his face against her expensive sandals. "Do not leave me. I love you. I did all of this for you. I stole that money to give you the store you wanted. I can fix this. I will get a real job. I will work in the warehouses if I have to. Please, baby, do not walk away." Savannah looked down at him with an expression of pure, unfiltered revulsion. She kicked her leg out violently, striking him in the shoulder and forcing him to release his grip. "Do not touch me with your pathetic hands," she hissed, stepping back to ensure his tears did not stain her dress. "You are going to a federal penitentiary, DeAndre. You forged documents and embezzled hundreds of thousands of dollars. You have absolutely nothing to offer me anymore. I am going back to my parents' estate, and my lawyers will serve you the divorce papers by Monday morning." DeAndre collapsed onto his side, curling into a fetal position as he wept uncontrollably. His entire identity was predicated on the illusion of wealth and superiority. Without the stolen corporate funds to prop him up, he was completely empty. He pounded his fists against the stone, crying out for his wife, but she had already turned her back on him again. She retrieved her phone from the lounger, adjusted her sunglasses, and strutted toward the gates without a single backward glance, stepping over the scattered bank statements that detailed her husband's federal crimes. DeAndre cried even louder, his voice echoing a deep and profound despair. He had totally sacrificed his integrity, his precious family legacy, and his grandmother's trust, all just for a woman who viewed him as nothing more than a walking automated teller machine. The humiliation was absolute. He was utterly exposed, stripped of his fake degree, his stolen wealth, and his trophy wife in a matter of minutes. Valerie shook uncontrollably. The racist vitriol had shattered the spell. The daughter-in-law she favored had just degraded her race and family on her patio. The realization of who the real enemy was crashed into her with brutal force. She spun toward me, her eyes wild with furious indignation. "Zaria, do not just stand there," Valerie demanded, pointing a shaking finger at Savannah retreating back. "You own this company now. You own the estate. Call your security team. Have that racist trash thrown out onto the street immediately. Use your power to defend this family." I stood perfectly still, my hands resting comfortably in the pockets of my tailored charcoal trousers. I looked at my mother, watching her desperately try to command me just like she used to. I thought about the days I spent starving while she bought Savannah luxury purses. "There was no apology, no parents there when I needed you most," I stated softly, letting the silence amplify my absolute detachment. "I am not lifting a single finger to help you now." I stepped back, completely washing my hands of their self-inflicted disaster. "She is your daughter-in-law, Mom. You chose her over me." The sharp clatter of Savannah's heels faded as she rounded the corner of the estate. A moment later, the aggressive roar of her luxury vehicle engine shattered the heavy silence of the patio. Tires screeched against the pristine cobblestone driveway, the sound echoing like a violent exclamation point on their ruined marriage. DeAndre remained on the wet stones, staring at the empty archway where his wife had just disappeared. His chest heaved with ragged, uneven breaths. The realization that Savannah was actually gone, taking the last shred of his fabricated social status with her, seemed to short-circuit his brain. He slowly pushed himself up from the puddles of spilled champagne, his expensive silk shirt clinging to his soaking wet shoulders. His tear-streaked face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. His eyes locked onto me wide and manic. He let out a primal roar, pointing a trembling, accusing finger directly at my chest. "You always ruin everything," he screamed, his voice cracking with hysterical rage. "You just could not stand seeing me happy. You have always been jealous of me. Every single time I build something beautiful, you come in and smash it to pieces." It was a pathetic, desperate deflection, and it was entirely predictable. I stared back at him, feeling a deep sense of déjà vu. He was 32 years old, but in that moment, he was exactly the same cowardly 12-year-old boy standing in the foyer of our childhood home. I vividly remembered the sound of our grandfather's priceless antique vase shattering against the hardwood floor because DeAndre had been carelessly tossing a baseball indoors. When our parents rushed into the room, terrified by the crash, DeAndre had immediately pointed a shaking finger at me, crying fake tears, screaming that I had pushed him. He blamed me for the broken antique, and Valerie had grounded me for a month without ever asking for my side of the story. He had spent his entire life breaking things and letting me take the punishment. But there was no antique vase to sweep under the rug today, and I was no longer the silent scapegoat willing to absorb his collateral damage. "You ruined your own life, DeAndre," I stated, my voice completely level. "You stole corporate funds to buy a woman who only loved your bank account. I just handed you the receipt." He shook his head violently in denial, spittle flying from his lips as he took a heavy, aggressive step toward me. "You planned this," he snarled, his fists balling at his sides. "You orchestrated this whole spectacle just to humiliate me in front of Savannah and her friends. You destroyed my marriage. You destroyed my life. I am going to make you pay for this, Zaria. I swear to God I will tear you apart. You are a bitter, jealous sociopath who cannot stand the fact that Mom and Dad always loved me more." DeAndre lunged forward, charging at me with blind, reckless momentum. He fully intended to physically strike me, reverting to the brute force of a cornered animal. I did not flinch. I did not even blink. I stood perfectly still, maintaining my ground, because I had anticipated exactly how his fragile ego would react to total exposure. Before he could close the remaining 5 feet between us, two massive figures stepped smoothly out from the shadowed alcove of the pool house. The private security contractors I had hired that morning moved with terrifying speed and precision. The lead guard, a towering man with broad shoulders and a tailored black suit, grabbed DeAndre by the collar of his wet shirt and shoved him backward with effortless force. DeAndre stumbled hard, his dress shoes slipping on the wet patio, and crashed back down onto his hands and knees. The second guard stepped up beside me, forming an impenetrable human wall. "If you take one more step toward Ms. Sterling, you will leave this estate in handcuffs," the lead guard warned, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. DeAndre stared up at the giant men gasping for air, the fight instantly draining out of his cowardly frame. I stepped forward, looking down at my brother with absolute disdain. "You are a parasite, DeAndre," I said, my words dropping like anvils. "You spent 32 years feeding off our parents and feeding off a company you never earned the right to run. You have no actual skills, no education, and zero integrity. You are a weak, pathetic fraud, and the entire world finally knows it. You have disgraced yourself in front of everyone, and I am truly glad to witness it." I turned to the lead security contractor, gesturing toward the cowering man on the ground. "You have exactly 1 hour to pack your bags, DeAndre," I stated, my voice echoing with unyielding authority. "The title deed to this property was transferred to the corporate holding trust last month to hide your mounting debts. As the new majority shareholder of the trust, I am officially terminating your residency. You have 60 minutes to gather your personal belongings and exit the premises. After that, you are trespassing on my property, and these gentlemen will forcibly remove you." DeAndre whimpered, shaking his head in disbelief. Marcus stumbled forward, his face pale and slick with panicked sweat. He reached out his hands, trembling violently. "Zaria, please," Marcus begged, his voice cracking into a desperate, pathetic whine. "You cannot put your brother out on the street like this. He has no money. Savannah took the cars. He has absolutely nowhere to go tonight. Let me just take him home with us. He can stay in his old room at the house until we figure out a legal strategy to fix this mess. Just let him come home." I looked at my father with dead calm eyes, feeling absolutely nothing but cold clinical satisfaction as I delivered the final devastating blow. "He cannot move into your house, Dad." Marcus blinked his mind, struggling to process my absolute refusal. He looked at the sprawling patio around us, then back at me, his chest puffing out with a sudden desperate flare of his old arrogance. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and stood up straighter, trying to reclaim a fraction of his lost dignity. "What do you mean he cannot move into my house?" he demanded, his voice shaking but attempting to sound authoritative. "I am still your father, and that is still my property. I hold the deed to the family estate. I pay the property taxes. If I want to bring my son home to regroup and figure out our next steps, I will absolutely do it. You may have manipulated your way into controlling the company, Zaria, but you do not dictate what happens under my own roof." Valerie stepped up right beside him, nodding vigorously, her tear-streaked face twisting into a mask of bitter defiance. She crossed her arms, glaring at me with the same condescending sneer she had worn my entire life. "Your father is entirely correct," she spat, her voice regaining its familiar venomous edge. "You have done enough damage here today. You have successfully ruined your brother's marriage and stolen the company he was supposed to inherit. You are a cold, vindictive girl. But you do not own us. We will go back to our home. We will hire the best defense attorneys in the state, and we will crush whatever ridiculous charges you think you can bring against this family. DeAndre is coming home with us right now." I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the calculated, precise smile of a predator watching its prey step willingly into the final trap. I reached into the sleek leather portfolio I had brought with me and slowly pulled out one last heavy document. It was bound in thick blue cardstock, sealed with a prominent silver notary stamp. The paper felt heavy in my hands, carrying the weight of absolute destruction. "You really think I just stumbled upon DeAndre embezzlement this morning?" I asked, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet register. "I have known about the missing capital for exactly 3 weeks. I knew the moment the forensic accountants flagged the first forged check. And I also knew exactly what you did when you realized the auditors were going to uncover the massive hole in the corporate accounts, Dad. Marcus froze. The color drained from his face so fast, he looked practically translucent. He took a stumbling step backward, his mouth opening but producing absolutely no sound. When you saw the audit notice, you panicked, I continued, my voice echoing across the silent pool deck. You knew DeAndre was guilty. You knew he had stolen $600,000. Instead of holding your precious golden boy accountable, instead of turning him in to protect the company and the employees who rely on us, you tried to cover it up. You went to Vanguard Sterling Bank 4 days ago to secure an emergency bridge loan. You needed raw cash to secretly replenish the stolen logistics funds before the auditors presented their final quarterly report. Valerie turned to Marcus, her eyes wide with confusion. Marcus, what is she talking about? Valerie demanded, grabbing his arm. What bridge loan? He could not get a clean corporate loan because the company assets were frozen. Pending my grandmother trust execution, I explained, looking directly at my mother. So he had to use a personal asset to secure the $600,000. He needed collateral. Huge collateral. I held up the blue document, letting the afternoon sun catch the silver seal. I turned the pages, exposing the prominent signatures at the bottom. He secretly mortgaged your house, Mom, I stated clearly. He put the entire family estate, the mansion you have spent the last 30 years decorating and bragging about, to your country club friends, up as collateral for a high-interest short-term commercial loan. He leveraged the roof over your head to cover the tracks of a criminal. Valerie let out a sound that was half gasp, half scream. She shoved Marcus away from her, as if he were suddenly radioactive. You mortgaged the estate, she shrieked, her voice cracking with pure hysteria. You put my home on the line for his boutique debt. Marcus raised his hands defensively, his entire body trembling. I was going to pay it off, he stammered, looking wildly between me and Valerie. The logistics dividends would have cleared next month. I just needed to float the cash for 30 days to pass the audit. It was a temporary fix. It was a fatal mistake, I corrected him smoothly. You took out a distressed loan with a predatory interest rate because you were desperate. But you did not read the fine print regarding the debt reassignment clauses. Vanguard Sterling Bank packages and sells distressed debts to private holding firms every single day. I formed an anonymous holding LLC last week. 2 days ago, my holding company purchased your specific debt portfolio directly from Vanguard Sterling. Marcus collapsed into a patio chair, his head dropping between his knees. I own the debt, I said, staring down at him. I am the bank now, and since you fraudulently misrepresented your corporate income to secure that personal loan, you are officially in default. The deed to the family estate transferred to my holding company at noon today. Valerie fell to her knees, screaming into her hands. The absolute magnitude of their utter ruin washed over her in a tidal wave of undeniable despair. Her perfect elite world was completely obliterated. She had absolutely nothing left to her name. You told me I was a disappointment, I whispered, looking down at them both as they wallowed in their own miserable wreckage. You mortgaged the very home I grew up in to protect a thief, and now you are all officially homeless. The sharp clatter of Savannah's heels faded as she rounded the corner of the estate. A moment later, the aggressive roar of her luxury vehicle's engine shattered the heavy silence of the patio. Tires screeched against the pristine cobblestone driveway, the sound echoing like a violent exclamation point on their ruined marriage. DeAndre remained on the wet stone, staring at the empty archway where his wife had just disappeared. His chest heaved with ragged, uneven breaths. The realization that Savannah was actually gone, taking the last shred of his fabricated social status with her, seemed to short-circuit his brain. He slowly pushed himself up from the puddles of spilled champagne, his expensive silk shirt clinging to his soaking wet shoulders. His tear-streaked face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. His eyes locked onto me wide and manic. He let out a primal roar, pointing a trembling, accusing finger directly at my chest. You always ruin everything, he screamed, his voice cracking with hysterical rage. You just could not stand seeing me happy. You have always been jealous of me. Every single time I build something beautiful, you come in and smash it to pieces. It was a pathetic, desperate deflection, and it was entirely predictable. I stared back at him, feeling a deep sense of déjà vu. He was 32 years old, but in that moment, he was exactly the same cowardly 12-year-old boy standing in the foyer of our childhood home. I vividly remembered the sound of our grandfather's priceless antique vase shattering against the hardwood floor because DeAndre had been carelessly tossing a baseball indoors. When our parents rushed into the room, terrified by the crash, DeAndre had immediately pointed a shaking finger at me, crying fake tears, screaming that I had pushed him. He blamed me for the broken antique, and Valerie had grounded me for a month without ever asking for my side of the story. He had spent his entire life breaking things and letting me take the punishment. But there was no antique vase to sweep under the rug today, and I was no longer the silent scapegoat willing to absorb his collateral damage. "You ruined your own life, DeAndre." I stated, my voice completely level. "You stole corporate funds to buy a woman who only loved your bank account. I just handed you the receipt." He shook his head violently in denial, spittle flying from his lips, as he took a heavy, aggressive step toward me. "You planned this." He snarled, his fists balling at his sides. "You orchestrated this whole spectacle just to humiliate me in front of Savannah and her friends. You destroyed my marriage. You destroyed my life. I am going to make you pay for this, Zaria. I swear to God I will personally tear you apart right now. You are just a bitter, jealous sociopath who cannot stand the fact that Mom and Dad always loved me so much more than you." DeAndre lunged forward, charging at me with blind, reckless momentum. He fully intended to physically strike me, reverting to the brute force of a cornered animal. I did not flinch. I did not even blink. I stood perfectly still, maintaining my ground, because I had anticipated exactly how his fragile ego would react to total exposure. Before he could close the remaining 5 feet between us, 2 massive figures stepped smoothly out from the shadowed alcove of the pool house. The private security contractors I had hired that morning moved with terrifying speed and precision. The lead guard, a towering man with broad shoulders and a tailored black suit, grabbed DeAndre by the collar of his wet shirt and shoved him backward with effortless force. DeAndre stumbled hard, his dress shoes slipping on the wet patio, and crashed back down onto his hands and knees. The second guard stepped up beside me, forming an impenetrable human wall. "If you take one more step toward Ms. Sterling, you will leave this estate in handcuffs," the lead guard warned, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. DeAndre stared up at the giant men gasping for air, the fight instantly draining out of his cowardly frame. I stepped forward, looking down at my brother with absolute disdain. "You are a parasite, DeAndre," I said, my words dropping like anvils. "You spent 32 years feeding off our parents and feeding off a company you never earned the right to run. You have no actual skills, no education, and zero integrity. Your many lies have finally caught up with you, and there is nowhere to hide. You are a weak, pathetic fraud, and the entire world finally knows it. You have disgraced yourself in front of everyone, and I am truly glad to witness it." I turned back to the lead security contractor. "You have exactly 1 hour to pack your bags, DeAndre," I stated, my voice echoing with unyielding authority. "The title deed to this property transferred to the corporate trust to hide your debts. As the majority shareholder, I am officially terminating your residency. You have 60 minutes to gather your personal belongings and exit the premises. After that, you are trespassing on my property, and these gentlemen will forcibly remove you." DeAndre whimpered, shaking his head in disbelief. Marcus stumbled forward, his face pale and slick with panicked sweat. He reached out, his hands trembling violently. "Zaria." "Please," Marcus begged, his voice cracking into a desperate, pathetic whine. "You cannot put your brother out on the street like this. He has no money." Savannah took the cars. "He has absolutely nowhere to go tonight. Let me just take him home with us. He can stay in his old room at the house until we fix this mess. Just let him come home." I looked at my father with dead calm eyes, feeling absolutely nothing but cold, clinical satisfaction as I delivered the final devastating blow. "He cannot move into your house, Dad." Valerie remained crumpled on the damp stone of the patio, her designer dress soaking up the puddles of spilled champagne and chlorinated pool water. She was crying uncontrollably loud, gasping sobs that tore through her chest and echoed against the manicured hedges of the estate. All of her carefully cultivated high society poise had evaporated in an instant, leaving behind a terrified, broken woman who had just realized her entire reality was a lie. Beside her, Marcus looked as though he had aged 20 years in the span of 5 minutes. His broad shoulders were slumped, his face hollow and ashen, the arrogant fire completely extinguished from his eyes. The wealthy, untouchable patriarch was gone, replaced by a desperate debtor who had gambled away his legacy and lost everything. "Zaria, please," Marcus begged, his voice a hoarse, unrecognizable rasp. He reached out a trembling hand, though he did not dare touch me. "We made a mistake, a terrible, catastrophic mistake. But you cannot do this to us. You cannot take our home. We have nowhere else to go. We will do whatever you want. We will sign whatever documents you need. Just give us a second chance to make this right." Valerie looked up, her mascara running in dark, jagged streaks down her cheeks. "We are family, Zaria," she pleaded, her voice cracking with desperation. "You are my daughter. You cannot throw your own mother out onto the street. We are family. We have to stick together in times of crisis. You have the power to fix this. You can drop the audit. You can forgive the loan. Please, I am begging you. We are family." I stared down at them, feeling absolutely zero catharsis from their pathetic fake tears. Their sudden reliance on familial bonds was nothing more than a desperate manipulation tactic. "You were not thinking about family when you enabled a criminal," I stated, my voice cold and unyielding. "You were perfectly fine sacrificing my future to cover his tracks. The audit is already filed. The digital ledgers are sealed. I have the exact forensic accounting reports right here, which legally bind this eviction. For the official record, they are listed as Duyen Mao 1_22.docx, Duyen Mao 2_22.docx, Duyen Mao 3_22.docs, and Duyen Mao 4_22.docx. Those files detail every single cent DeAndre stole and every single signature you forged to protect him. There is no second chance. You are not sorry you hurt me, Mom. You are just sorry you are broke." Marcus buried his face in his hands, letting out a long, shuddering groan of absolute defeat. Valerie continued to sob, clutching her arms around her stomach, as if trying to hold her shattered world together. They were completely pathetic, drowning in the consequences of their own toxic favoritism. I watched them wallow in their despair for a few moments, letting the silence stretch out, letting the gravity of their ruin crush the last breath of entitlement out of their lungs. Then, I slowly reached into the pocket of my tailored charcoal trousers and pulled out my cell phone. I tapped the screen, navigating to the Messages application. I found the conversation thread with my mother, opening the exact text she had sent me earlier that very morning, back when she still thought she held all the power. The remaining country club guests, the ones who had been too morbidly fascinated by the unfolding drama to leave, were still huddled in small, whispering groups around the perimeter of the patio. They were watching our every move, their eyes wide with shock and judgment. I held the phone up the screen, glowing brightly in the late afternoon sun. "This morning, you demanded that I humiliate myself to appease your golden child," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the silent courtyard so that every single guest could hear. I looked directly at Valerie's tear-stained face. "I am going to read exactly what you texted me, Mom." I cleared my throat and read the message aloud, my tone dripping with icy precision. "No public apology, no parents. You either stand in front of everyone and beg for your brother's forgiveness, or you are no longer welcome in this family." I lowered the phone, my eyes locking onto hers with merciless intensity. "How many times did you force me to do exactly that when I was a child?" I asked, the bitter memories flashing through my mind. "Whenever DeAndre threw a tantrum, whenever he broke a window or failed a test or ruined a family vacation, you always found a way to blame me. And you always made me stand in the living room in front of relatives and neighbors and apologize to him for things I never did. You humiliated me to protect his fragile ego. You made me beg for forgiveness just to keep the peace. Well, the peace is officially broken, I declared, stepping closer to her cowering form. Now it is your turn. I gestured broadly to the remaining party guests who were staring at Valerie with undisguised contempt. Apologize, I commanded, my voice snapping like a whip. Right now, in front of everyone here. Valerie flinched as if she had been physically struck. She looked around the patio, her eyes darting frantically from face to face. She saw the wealthy neighbors she had spent decades trying to impress. She saw the society wives she had hosted at lavish charity galas. She saw the sheer disgust and judgment written across all of their features. The humiliating realization crashed down upon her with crushing weight. The facade of the perfect elite Sterling family was completely obliterated. She was no longer a respected matriarch. She was the exposed enabler of a thief stripped of her home and her dignity. She had nothing left to hide behind. Valerie choked on her words, looking at the remaining party guests staring at them. She finally forced out a broken, pathetic apology. I am sorry, she weakly sobbed out aloud. I stared down at the woman who had made my entire childhood a living nightmare, watching her shoulders heave as she choked on the bitter ash of her own ruined pride. The apology was forced, humiliating, and entirely necessary. The remaining country club guests immediately began filtering out, whispering furiously to one another as they rushed to their expensive cars. The spectacle was over. The Sterling family was publicly gutted, their rotting foundation exposed to the world. I signaled the lead security contractor with a sharp nod. He immediately gestured to his team, and they began methodically marching into the mansion to gather his scattered belongings. The physical reality of the eviction was finally taking shape. Marcus watched the guards haul heavy designer suitcases out of the grand foyer, his eyes tracking their movements with a vacant, hollow stare. The fight had completely drained out of him. He looked down at Valerie, who was still weeping on the wet cobblestones, and then he looked back up at me. He stood up, brushing dirt off his slacks, the arrogant CEO persona visibly peeling away like dead skin. Zaria, he said, his voice stripped of its usual booming authority. It was quiet, almost fragile. May I speak with you? Just for a moment, just the two of us, away from this. He gestured vaguely toward the driveway where DeAndre was currently arguing pointlessly with a security guard. I considered denying the request perfectly, content to let him wallow in the mess he created. However, ensuring absolute clarity about their future required a final, definitive conversation. I gestured toward the far end of the rose garden, out of earshot from Valerie, weeping loudly. Marcus followed me, his footsteps heavy and dragging. When we reached the trellis, he stopped and leaned against the wooden frame, looking out over the property he no longer owned. The air between us was thick with the scent of blooming roses and absolute ruin. He did not look like the terrifying patriarch who used to dictate my every move. He just looked like a tired, broken old man. I crossed my arms, waiting for him to speak. I am not going to beg you to reverse the corporate buyout, he began, his voice raspy. I know the audit is sealed. I know I committed financial crimes to cover for my son. The empire is gone, and I accept that. But I need to explain why things happened the way they did. I need you to understand why I pushed you away. I did not ask for an explanation, I replied flatly. Your motives are irrelevant to me now. He shook his head, staring down at his hands. I was terrified of you, Zaria. He confessed, the admission tumbling out of him like a physical weight. From the moment you were born, my mother, your grandma Odessa, saw something in you that she never saw in me. She looked at me and saw a competent manager. But she looked at you and saw a visionary. She saw the true heir to her legacy. She bypassed me entirely to groom you for leadership, and my pride could not handle being eclipsed by my own daughter. I felt my jaw tighten. You punished a child because an old woman recognized her potential. I stated the sheer absurdity of his logic, making my blood run cold. Yes, he whispered, refusing to meet my eyes. I felt small, I felt inadequate. So, I poured all my energy into DeAndre. I compensated for my own deep insecurities by spoiling your brother, elevating him, making him the golden child to prove that I could manufacture a worthy successor on my own terms. I wanted to build him up so high that he would cast a shadow over you. I wanted to prove Odessa wrong. You failed miserably, I reminded him without a shred of sympathy. You built a sociopath who just imploded your entire life. I know Marcus choked out, a single tear escaping and tracking down his weathered cheek. I created a monster because I was too weak to nurture a genius. I looked at you so independent, so brilliant, so capable, and I resented you for it. I convinced myself that you were entirely self-sufficient. I was afraid you did not need me at all. I stepped closer to him, my voice dropping to a harsh, unforgiving whisper. I did need you, I said, the words carrying the weight of decades of childhood isolation. I did need a father. I needed someone to protect me when Valerie blamed me for everything. I needed someone to guide me. You just were not there. You chose to feed your ego instead of raising your daughter. And now it is entirely too late to change anything. Now you must learn to live with the exact man you built. Marcus wiped his face, his expression crumpling into utter despair. Is there any way to salvage our relationship? He pleaded. Any way for me to earn your forgiveness? I stared at him, feeling absolutely nothing. You will receive a small monthly pension from the company holding trust, I stated coldly. It will be just enough to cover basic living expenses for you and Mom. But you are completely severed from the corporation. You are never to make business decisions again. You have zero authority, zero equity, and zero influence. Our relationship is strictly transactional from this point forward. You are a retired liability, nothing more. Before Marcus could respond, sharp, frantic footsteps crunched against the gravel path. Valerie burst through the rose bushes. Her makeup completely ruined her expensive dress, stained with mud and pool water. She looked absolutely wild, her eyes darting between me and Marcus in sheer panic as she processed the reality of the moving trucks pulling into the driveway. Zaria, she gasped out, choking on her own hysterical breath as she tried to interrupt our conversation. Where are we ever supposed to sleep tonight? Valerie's frantic question hung in the heavy air, dripping with a terrifying level of entitlement that defied all logic. Even now, standing in the wreckage of her own making, she genuinely expected me to provide a luxury hotel suite or a vacation home to soften the blow of their financial treason. I looked at her ruined designer dress, the mud clinging to the hem, and felt a profound icy sense of closure. You will sleep exactly where your choices have led you, I answered, my tone devoid of pity. I gestured toward the massive moving trucks idling in the circular driveway. The men inside those trucks are not packing your imported antique furniture or your priceless art collection. Those assets legally belong to my holding company now. They are being liquidated to cover the fraudulent commercial debts Marcus accrued to protect DeAndre. The security contractors are only packing your basic clothing, your personal toiletries, and cheap sentimental items that hold absolutely zero resale value. Valerie let out a strangled gasp, her hands flying to her chest. You are taking my things, she shrieked. My jewelry, my clothes, my entire life is in that house. Your life was a mirage funded by corporate theft, I corrected her sharply, stepping forward, until she physically shrank back. You lived in a glass house built on stolen capital, and the glass just shattered. You do not own a single piece of jewelry that was not financed by the company you actively tried to push me out of. You do not have a bank account that is not currently frozen by federal auditors. You are completely unequivocally destitute. Marcus stood paralyzed next to the trellis, his silence confirming every word I said. Valerie whipped her head toward him, waiting for her powerful husband to fix the unfixable. When he merely averted his gaze, staring blankly at the manicured lawn, the finality of their ruin finally sank into her bones. She began to hyperventilate, her manicured fingers clawing at her own hair. We have nothing, she sobbed, the reality crashing down on her like a physical weight. We are going to be on the street. My friends will see me on the street. I reached into my sleek leather portfolio one last time. I withdrew a plain brass key attached to a scuffed plastic tag and held it out. Valerie stared at it like it was venomous, refusing to take it. I dropped it on the gravel at her feet, followed by a folded piece of printer paper. "That is your new address," I stated, watching Marcus slowly kneel to pick it up. He unfolded the paper, his eyes scanning the printed text before widening in absolute horror. He knew exactly where that was. "I prepaid the rent for 6 months." I continued, my voice ringing with poetic justice. "It is a modest 2-bedroom apartment in the industrial district of Southside. The plumbing groans, the heating is unreliable, and you will have to share a communal laundry room with working-class people who actually earn their paychecks. After your 6 months are up, you are entirely on your own. You will have to find jobs and pay your own way, just like the rest of the world." Valerie snatched the paper from Marcus, trembling hands, her eyes scanning the address. "No," she wailed, shaking her head violently. "No, that is a slum. We cannot live there. It is dangerous. It is filthy. It is the exact same apartment complex you forced me to live in 5 years ago." I interrupted, my voice slicing through her hysteria like a blade. "When I dropped out of your precious country club social circles to actually work for a living, you cut me off financially. You froze my accounts. You told me I would fail. You told me I would come crawling back. I lived in that exact building, eating cheap noodles and shivering through the winter while I built the capital that just bought your debt. I survived it. Now you get to experience the exact same struggle." Valerie looked up at me, her face pale, her jaw trembling as the memories of her own cruelty were reflected back at her. "You always told me I was a disappointment," I said, leaning in so she could hear every single syllable clearly. "You looked at my ambition and called it a disappointment. You looked at my independence and called it a disappointment. You called me a disappointment every single time I refused to be a pawn in your shallow, pathetic games." I pointed a finger at DeAndre, who was currently being escorted off the driveway by the security team, clutching a single duffel bag of sweatpants. "You bet your entire legacy on the golden child, and he bankrupted you. Look at your life right now. Look at your husband. Look at your son. Look at your mud-stained dress and your cheap brass key. Tell me who is the real disappointment now." Neither of them had an answer. Marcus simply closed his eyes, accepting the utter devastation, while Valerie collapsed back onto the gravel, clutching the piece of printed paper to her chest as she wept into the dirt. They were broken, stripped of their power, their wealth, and their illusions of superiority. I felt a profound, settling peace wash over my chest. The toxic cycle that had defined my entire existence was finally severed. I turned my back on my weeping family and walked away from the rose garden, leaving them to the harsh reality of their new lives. I strode purposefully across the courtyard, the security guards parting respectfully to let me pass. As I approached the grand mahogany doors of the mansion, I reached into the back seat of my parked car and retrieved the black graduation gown I had brought with me. I slipped it over my shoulders, the dark fabric billowing behind me like a triumphant cape. I walked through the empty, echoing foyer of the estate, my footsteps ringing out against the marble floors. The house was already stripped of their presence, hollowed out, and ready to be sold. I stepped out onto the front porch, the cool evening air washing over my face. I pulled the heavy mahogany doors shut behind me, the locking mechanism engaging with a loud final click. The sharp click of the mahogany doors locking behind me sounded like a gunshot in the quiet evening air. It was the definitive sound of a 30-year nightmare coming to an end. I stood on the front porch of the estate for a moment, letting the cool breeze wash over my face. The magnitude of what I had accomplished settled into my bones. Behind me, my parents and brother were surrounded by security contractors stripped of their power, wealth, and toxic entitlement. I did not look back at them, not even once. They were ghosts to me now. I walked down the marble steps, my graduation gown billowing around my ankles, and moved toward my black sedan near the gates. The lead security guard gave me a respectful nod as I passed, stepping aside to clear my path. I slid into the driver's seat, the plush leather interior wrapping around me like a shield. I closed the door, sealing out the frantic, muffled sounds of Valerie's distant sobbing and Marcus's desperate arguments with the eviction team. The cabin of the car was perfectly, beautifully silent. I gripped the leather steering wheel, my knuckles turning white as the adrenaline that had fueled me for the past 72 hours finally began to recede. I closed my eyes and a single tear slipped down my cheek. It was not a tear of sadness, nor was it a tear of mourning for the family I had just destroyed. It was a tear of profound, overwhelming relief. For my entire life, I had carried the crushing, suffocating burden of trying to earn their approval. I had twisted myself into knots, achieved perfect grades, built an undeniable resume, and sacrificed my own happiness, all in a pathetic, desperate bid to make them look at me the way they looked at DeAndre. That desperate, starving child inside of me was finally dead. I no longer craved their validation because I had finally recognized their complete and utter worthlessness. They were not titans of industry or pillars of high society. They were just weak, greedy people who had tried to build an empire on a foundation of lies and favoritism. I wiped the single tear from my jaw, feeling lighter than I had ever felt in my entire existence. I pressed the ignition button. The engine purred to life with a quiet, powerful hum. I shifted the car into drive and pressed the accelerator, gliding smoothly down the long, winding driveway. The wrought iron gates of the estate swung open automatically, allowing me to pass through. I merged onto the main road, accelerating away from the wealthy, manicured neighborhood that had served as my childhood prison. I drove into the descending twilight, leaving the wreckage of the Sterling family legacy completely in my rearview mirror. 6 months later, the morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the chief executive suite on the 40th floor of the Sterling Industries Tower in downtown Boston. I sat comfortably at the head of the massive obsidian conference table, projecting absolute, unquestionable authority. Across from me sat 3 senior executives from Vanguard Sterling Bank, the exact same men who had attended my graduation party and witnessed the spectacular collapse of my father's fraudulent bridge loan. Today, they were not looking at me with the polite, condescending indulgence they used to reserve for Marcus's daughter. They were looking at me with undisguised respect and a healthy dose of professional fear. I slid the thick, glossy quarterly financial reports across the polished glass surface toward their lead representative. Since restructuring the executive board and eliminating the massive logistical deficit caused by the previous administration's embezzlement, our profit margins have increased by 34% across all active sectors. I stated, my voice crisp and commanding. We have streamlined the supply chain, liquidated the toxic residential assets, and secured 3 new international distribution contracts. Sterling Industries is no longer bleeding capital to fund personal liabilities. We are leaner, faster, and infinitely more profitable. The bank executive reviewed the charts, nodding in genuine admiration. These numbers are staggering, Zaria, he admitted, closing the folder with a satisfied snap. Marcus ran this company into the ground for a decade, but you have managed to completely reverse the trajectory in just 2 quarters. Vanguard is entirely comfortable extending our corporate partnership under your direct leadership. We finalized the terms, shook hands, and I watched them exit the suite with a profound sense of satisfaction. When the heavy oak doors clicked shut, leaving me alone in the expansive office, I stood up and walked over to my private desk. I picked up a small, silver-framed photograph resting near my computer monitor. It was a picture of Grandma Odessa, her sharp, intelligent eyes staring back at me with that familiar, demanding intensity. She had bypassed her own son to groom me, enduring Marcus's bitter resentment because she knew I was the only one capable of wielding the sword. "I did it, Grandma," I whispered to the empty room, silently thanking the woman who had given me the armor I needed to survive my own blood. "Your legacy is finally secure, and the parasites are completely gone." I set the silver frame back down, feeling the solid, undeniable reality of my success. The absolute quiet of the executive suite was suddenly interrupted by the sharp, persistent buzzing of the intercom on my desk. I pressed the flashing button, leaning toward the speaker. "Yes, Chloe, what is it?" I asked my executive assistant, Ms. Sterling. Chloe's voice crackled through the speaker, laced with extreme discomfort and hesitation. I am so sorry to bother you, but there is a man down in the main lobby causing a bit of a scene. He is currently soaking wet holding a battered resume and refusing to leave security alone. He says he is your brother DeAndre, and he is begging the front desk for a job as a mailroom clerk today. I instructed Chloe to send him to the secondary conference room. Taking the private elevator down, I opened the glass door. The sight was jarring. DeAndre, the former golden child who used to wear custom Italian silk, was drowning in a cheap polyester suit. His shoulders were hunched, his hair plastered to his forehead from the morning rain. He stood immediately clutching a damp manila folder. "Zaria," he said, his voice stripped of its usual arrogant swagger. "Thank you for seeing me." I did not offer him a seat. I stood near the doorway, letting the silence stretch until he shifted uncomfortably on his feet. "The bank seized my accounts." He continued, his words rushing out in a desperate flood. "Savannah locked me out of the condo before serving me with papers. I have been sleeping on a friend's couch for 3 weeks, and he just told me I have to leave by Friday. I need a job. I will do anything. I will sort mail. I will fetch coffee. I just need a paycheck to survive." He thrust the damp folder toward me. It was a resume listing his fabricated executive titles that were now entirely worthless. I looked at the paper, then looked him dead in the eye. I stepped forward and took the folder from his trembling hand. I did not even open it. I dropped it directly into the recycling bin beside the door. "You are entirely unqualified for the mailroom," I stated coldly. "It requires punctuality, organization, and a fundamental understanding of hard work. You possess absolutely none of those traits." DeAndre flinched. "Please, Zaria," he begged, finally experiencing the crushing weight of reality. "I have absolutely nothing left." I stared at him, feeling no pity, only a profound sense of closure. I reached into the pocket of my blazer and pulled out a single sheet of paper. I slid it toward him. It was an employment application. "You start at the bottom, DeAndre," I said. "Just like I did. This is an application for a third-shift loading dock position at the warehouse. The work is physically grueling. The hours are terrible, and the pay is minimum wage. You will report to a supervisor who does not care about your last name. If you are late, you are fired. If you complain, you are fired. You will earn every cent with the sweat of your own brow." He swallowed hard, but reached out and took the pen. "Thank you," he whispered, signing the dotted line. I took a deep breath, savoring the absolute quiet that had replaced their constant chaos. Leaving him to fill out the endless pages of employment history, I walked back to the elevators, my mind drifting to the rest of the parasites who used to feed on this company. DeAndre was not the only one who had met a spectacular downfall. Savannah, his calculating wife, filed for a messy, highly publicized divorce the moment the holding company seized Marcus's assets. She was utterly blindsided when the judge informed her that every asset she claimed was purchased with embezzled corporate funds. She walked away with absolutely nothing but staggering legal bills, moving back into her childhood bedroom in her parents' cramped home. As for Marcus and Valerie, their descent into the working class was a public spectacle. The 6 months of prepaid rent at the South Side apartment quickly evaporated. Marcus, the former titan who terrorized boardrooms, now worked as a shift manager at a hardware store, spending his days arguing with customers and sweeping aisles. Valerie's reality was perfectly poetic. The woman who once hosted lavish galas was recently spotted at a discount grocery store, furiously arguing with a teenage cashier over expired coupons. She spends her afternoons counting loose change, wearing faded designer coats, because she cannot afford anything new. Their elite former friends had completely exiled them, ignoring their desperate calls and pretending not to recognize them. The sterling name was now synonymous with spectacular ruin. They were living the exact nightmare they had forced upon me, trapped in a cycle of financial terror and social irrelevance. It was the perfect, inescapable consequence of their own unchecked greed. They had spent decades building a legacy of manipulation, deceit, and profound cruelty. But they had fundamentally misunderstood what actually endures in this world. True legacy is not inherited through stolen bank accounts or fabricated executive titles. True legacy is forged through resilience, relentless hard work, and the absolute refusal to be broken by toxic people. True legacy is built in the shadows, far away from the applause by those who are willing to bleed for their independence. I rode the elevator back up to the 40th floor, stepping into the brilliant sunlight of my corner office. I walked over to the expansive windows, looking out over the sprawling city below me. The skyscrapers gleamed in the morning light. I placed my hand against the cool glass, feeling the steady thrumming pulse of the empire I now completely controlled. I did not just take revenge on the people who tried to destroy me. I took my life back entirely. I reclaimed my sanity, my power, and my future. I proved that sometimes the only way to heal from a toxic family is to let them face the absolute crushing consequences of their own actions. You cannot save people who are actively trying to drown you. You can only let go of their hands and watch them sink. I turned away from the window and walked back to my desk, sitting down in the high-backed leather chair. I adjusted the framed photograph of Grandma Odessa, her fierce, uncompromising eyes watching over the office she had built. I picked up my pen, ready to sign the next major contract, ready to lead this company into a completely new era of undeniable prosperity. The heavy, suffocating darkness of my past was entirely gone. The screen fades out on her confident, profoundly peaceful smile.